1986 when I was in a church gym as a high school student, being of absolutely no help whatsoever to the attorney volunteer in my church who was helping people with amnesty applications, and trying to figure out checklists of physical presence documents and things like that, and not understanding it at all. So good news is I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about comes from my experience where I am currently at DePaul Legal Clinic, where we have a partnership with 26 community-based organizations who provide immigration legal services. And in connection with our work with that, we've provided support around deferred action for childhood arrivals. And so what I'm going to talk about is based on the shared knowledge from those 26 organizations, as well as the rest of the staff at DePaul, as well as a lot of other stakeholders who come to our DACA roundtable meetings and funders who've supported our work. There was some discussion about, I want to say, political context for IRCA, and I just wanted to bring out two additional kinds of contextual things about DACA, which has come and I think plays into administrative relief going forward as well, right? So there had been a base of policy memorandums addressing prosecutorial discretion before DACA came out, right? So DACA really comes from a perspective of enforcement priorities and who is not an enforcement priority, and DACA is a subset, or the applicants under DACA are a subset of that enforcement priority, and going forward and looking at administrative relief, I think that will continue to be part of the conversation there. I think all of you know about DACA, so I'm not going to go over that, but a couple of elements of DACA I think are relevant to what I'm going to talk about with regard to lessons learned. One is certainly the documentary requirements, which were somewhat significant in terms of physical presence, age, continuous residence in the United States. The other is the fee, which is a significant factor for DACA applicants. So just to be aware of those. And a little bit about the process. So I want to talk a little bit about the process, about challenges community-based organizations and ourselves experienced in terms of trying to meet the service demands of DACA applicants when the program first came out, and then some perspective from a year or 2 years out. Call me back 28 years from now and I'll really be smart about the lessons learned on DACA. So the program was announced in June of 2012, and the earliest anyone could have applied would have been in August of 2012, and there was a 60-day rollout period. I think you all know that. So in terms of the timing of preparedness, that didn't give those of us in the legal services community a lot of time to prepare and respond. The other thing about that is now, since the first applications went in August of 2012, we're now looking at the first kind of renewal applications in November of 2014, and that's something I want to talk about going forward. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about some data, though, also. So depending on whose numbers you read, an estimated 1.2 million are eligible nationwide. MPI put out numbers of 60,000 who are currently eligible. It goes up to 106 if you think about potentially eligible who wouldn't be barred either by age or education. So if we look at about 60,000 eligible in Illinois and about 37,000 have applied, that still leaves us with a significant amount who haven't yet applied for DACA. And the most often cited reasons for not applying for DACA are fees and education. It's open-ended, something different from the IRCA program, and something significant in terms of thinking about the lessons learned and the lessons learned for administrative relief going forward, and something important in terms of messaging about administrative relief in DACA going forward. In terms of renewals, right now we're seeing about 50% renewal rate of those initial applications. So the other thing to be aware of, there's a significant population of current DACA approved cases that have not yet applied for renewal. So that's a little bit of the lay of the land. I invite all of you who've done this work to feel free to chime in or correct me at any time. In terms of legal services delivery, it was significant, the challenges presented to our CBO partners. So we definitely, now currently have 52 or 53 organizations in the state of Illinois authorized to provide immigration legal services. So a significant improvement from the time period in 1986 when many of you were doing this work. The organizations that we work with saw an up to 4-fold increase in demand for services in those initial months following DACA with level staff, right? And about 6 months into it, many of those organizations received funding through the ICIRR Collaborative, and we're thankful to the funders for that. But one of the things noted in response to that is it would have been extremely helpful had that funding come earlier than 6 months into the process when people were under the weight of significant caseloads. And something that our funding community has been responsive to in hearing those comments. There are a lot of things in terms of legal services delivery that we learned in terms of how to better use current resources or how to be more efficient in using current resources. So workshop seems like a great model when you're talking about large numbers of people who may be eligible for relief, but that wasn't what our DACA collaborative members told us was efficient to us, because building a workshop requires additional resources and time and management to deliver those services that may be more efficiently delivered in-house. Our partners came up with kind of modified workshops that they did in-house, DACA days and DACA classrooms, and I know Vivian's here at Erie Neighborhood House, and IJC has done pro bono workshops, and you can talk to them about kind of the different models that they came up with. But they involved some pre-screening and some assessment before someone actually came down and finalized an application. Given the documentary requirements for DACA, that was something that was significant. So I'll say that in response to those legal services delivery challenges, a year into it, we were lucky enough to have MacArthur Foundation support a conference on smart growth and capacity building, at which we learned a lot of information, and some of the information I'm giving you today comes from the insights there. But it provided a lot of our CBO partners the opportunity to reflect on their current service delivery model and their infrastructure, and revise some of their legal services delivery systems, and many of them are still in that process. I feel like we're lucky to have the CBO structures that we have. A lot of them, the comment was made about diversity and leadership around DACA and around CIR. Our CBOs, in terms of how vocal or visible they are in terms of the conversation going forward, many of them are led by former immigrants and refugees, right? And they're in the community and they're committed to the issues that are involved here. And I think preparedness for administrative relief, or CIR, can't go forward without their input and involvement, because that's who the community turns to. In terms of responses to some of those challenges, I think I've talked about some of them. There are challenges in legal services delivery. CBO partners revisited how to work more efficiently and effectively, and they're still in the process. They learned how to redirect resources. In terms of documentation, there were a lot of challenges, both with USCIS understanding what documents were, and on our end trying to obtain the documents. And it was helpful to be able to work with some of the same partners that you guys have referenced today from 1986, the city, and CPS, and city colleges, who've been active players in terms of trying to get information out and trying to provide supportive documents, and Ed Silverman at Illinois Department of Human Services. One of the types of documents people looked at to provide proofs was benefits received through that office, and when there was an issue about how far back that documentation went, in terms of providing proof of continual residence, we could reach out to Ed to try and improve documentation. The filing fee, is a problem. It was a problem in IRCA. That was heartbreaking to hear, and it continues to be a problem. And it continues to be a problem with renewals, which was the surprise to me, right? So I would have hoped that once people got deferred action and work authorization and Social Security numbers for 2 years, that they would have been in a better position to pay the renewal fee. But we're still seeing obstacles and challenges in people being able to come up with a renewal fee. I think the other thing that was may be different from IRCA and is USCIS involvement in the process with DACA, and hopefully that will be the same going forward with administrative relief, which, to borrow from Rebecca Carson's comments at our conference in June of 2013, transparent, committed to public engagement, and it was an iterative process, and it still is. We still, through the collaborative meet in person or telephonically with CIS ombudsmen and the Office of Public Engagement to raise issues of adjudications with them and get responses from them. So it seems in that way perhaps a little less combative with the agency than it was in 1986. I think time will tell whether or not that continues to be the case for administrative relief or comprehensive immigration reform going forward. With regard to renewal, I think the lingering issues are still education and fees, right? And I guess I'll move on to what this tells us going forward in the interest of time. So I don't know what administrative relief is going to look like. When I listened to Representative Gutierrez, he said that it would involve parents of U.S. citizens and anyone with an I-130 filed, and that there was some room for advocacy to also include parents of DACA kids. So maybe that's going to be who benefits from administrative relief and who doesn't. And I'd say that presents significant challenges and some considerations going forward. So that may make a difference in those 30,000 in Illinois who have not yet applied for DACA, right? If now the parents of DACA individuals are going to be eligible for future administrative relief. And so that's something for us to consider as legal service providers and stakeholders and funders in terms of what that increased demand will be on the DACA front. So I think the other thing I would say is, and I appreciate the funders in bringing Roberto Gonzalez to talk to us about his initial findings on the initial DACA applicants, is that I think there are tremendous opportunities both legally and on the non-legal side for education, right? So one of the significant barriers for DACA is not having the educational requirement or not having met the educational requirement. And currently, CIS Ombudsman has said that there are some issues with fraud in terms of proving the educational requirement. Again, we've had great partnership with CCC and some other community colleges to really push and be transparent about what are adult education classes that are going to be, reliable and credible classes. But I think the opportunity for adult education is connected with DACA, and future administrative relief is one that can't be missed. I think we can't miss the opportunity for public engagement going forward with the administration and with USCIS and inform it in the way that we have with DACA. And I think we can't miss the opportunity to support community-based organizations, because I think that that is who the community goes to for legal services in this area, to trust in what they know about the law and to trust in what they know about how to deliver legal services. I wanted to try and circle back around to a couple of themes that were mentioned before from IRCA, if I can indulge. So I feel like we've talked about money and the money issue that's present. Confidentiality was something that was, there are a couple of things I think to think about around messaging. So confidentiality was something that was mentioned around IRCA, right? So we had those confidentiality provisions. DACA in the FAQ states, refers to really its policy memos on who are enforcement priorities, right? And whether or not there's a risk to applying for DACA or not. So, but I think the issue is not, certainly a confidentiality provision would provide protection, but I think the issue is more one than legal confidentiality and perhaps one of perception in terms of what people's risk is in coming forward. And I think that is in part an education and messaging issue. We've heard from our CBO partners that some people were waiting for their friends to go through DACA the first time before they decided to apply for DACA renewal the second time. So people are waiting to see what happens to others. And the other thing that we heard that may be a confusing message going forward is people were waiting for comprehensive immigration reform before they decided to go forward with DACA. And I wonder also now how talk of administrative relief is going to affect DACA, and those two things interact as well. I think the charlatans are always going to be out there. And I think building our community-based organization partners will be something that will be helpful, but I think also thinking about how to do that quickly and efficiently, because I can bet that this charlatan doesn't say, you can come back and see me in 4 weeks when I have an open intake slot, right? But our CBO providers currently have some of those challenges. So thanks.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Siobhan.